Well, thank you all for being here today and taking time out of your day to come to the presentation on men's health. I want this to be kind of informal, so if you have any questions as we go along, stop me there. The approach I took on this was actually to send some members of my team out, and I came up with a list of questions that I thought were relevant questions that men might have. And then I sent my team out and said, go and talk to men here at NIH. At lunchtime, just stop them in the halls and find out, do they like these questions? What's really on their mind if they wanted to learn more about men's health or their own health. So there's not really a full presentation here, a cohesive theme, but kind of question and answer format. So feel free to raise your hand and ask me questions as we go along. Oh, there we go.
You mind staying on this side of the screen?
Sure,
yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So a little bit about me. I have a PhD in physiology. Kind of made the transition from basic science to public health here at NIH. I've been here for 6 years. And for the past 2 years, I've been the director of the fitness and wellness programs for the RNW. And for the last 5 years, I've helped in a variety of capacities develop and lead wellness activities here at NIH. I'm also a triathlete and cyclist and soccer referee. And I've been a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor, and done nutritional consulting over the years. And I see some people writing things down. These slides will be available afterwards, so you don't have to get writer's cramp writing everything down. So just before we dive into things, I want to just talk about the definition of health. A lot of people think of just the physical health, right? And I hope that people are embracing the more holistic definition of health now. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And here's just a model that encompasses both mental and physical, in addition to emotional and spiritual. And I think those models are becoming more prevalent rather than just focusing on either disease or just physical health. And so why focus on men's health? Well, one reason is this is Men's Health Week. But beyond that, are you going to advance? Most men need to pay more attention to their health. Compared to women, men are more likely to be less knowledgeable about their personal health. They're more likely to put off regular checkups and medical care. They're more likely to, or they're less likely to seek help from health practitioners, and they're more likely to take health risks, both physical and lifestyle. Physical risks being things like typically more dangerous jobs. When you walk down the street in Bethesda, you see men generally in trees cutting limbs. I saw that on my way to work today. And then driving at higher speeds, and lifestyle risks like more likely to smoke, drink to excess, and eat a less healthy diet. So the topics that we'll cover during this time are staying healthy and preventing disease. This remote's a little dodgy. Smoking and drinking, aging, blood pressure, injuries, and nutrition. And I could talk about each of these all day, but we're just going to kind of skim the surface of them, and if you have other questions, I'd be happy to talk about them. So staying healthy and preventing disease. What are the most important things you can do to stay healthy? That was a common question that came up when we polled men in the hallways. And one is maintaining a healthy weight. This is probably something that people know, but it's really, really important. And I chose this chart because what's often used, when you go to the doctor, they say, well, we're going to take your height and your weight, right? And they use that for simplicity and calculate your BMI. Well, for me, I am less muscular than I've ever been now, but I'm no leaner, and my body mass index has changed dramatically. I was in the very overweight before because I was lifting weights more, and that didn't necessarily place me at a higher risk of any diseases. But on the BMI chart, you know, it was not exactly reflecting my health status. And this recognizes that there are different frame sizes, right? And you know, I'm more of a medium frame, but someone on the larger frame size, I'm 6 foot, and so I'm right about 178. But if you're a larger frame, it's reasonable that you have more mass as well. So, but maintaining a healthy weight is really important. Eating a variety of healthy foods and limiting calories and saturated fat. Being physically active, and I chose these slides because it outlines several ways that you can be active. You know, you don't need to be a runner. Golfing, walking the course is certainly a way to be active. And then the gentleman down here dancing, you know, whatever you like to do to move. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to, on the protocol about asking questions. I have a question about weight, and particularly it's true for guys, but weight around the middle. You know, maybe not overweight anywhere else, but around the middle. But I just want to know, should I bring that up when you touch on that?
I will touch on that. So the question was about waist size and that sort of thing and weight. So that's a great question. I think I will dive into that. And then don't smoking is obviously very important. Also, seeing a doctor for regular screenings. That's one thing that many men do not do. Women are much better at that. Not just when you're sick. Controlling blood pressure and cholesterol. Protecting yourself from too much sun, whether it's with sunblock or staying out of the sun. Not drinking too much alcohol. Taking care of your teeth. It's something that has, you know, we know to brush and floss, but how many of us actually do it every night? You know, I was talking to a dentist once, and he said, you know, not flossing every night, just brushing is like taking a shower, not using soap. And that stuck with me. You know, I still don't floss every night as I should, but that stuck with me. And then managing stress, and I mean, that could be a talk in and of itself. Maybe I'll give another one later on that. So what is the leading cause of death for men? So this is actually the most recent data from CDC, from the National Vital Statistics System. And as you see, heart disease, cancer are top for both genders, but it's particularly higher in men. I mean, if you really dive into that, it's definitely statistically significant that it's higher in men. I like this. It really you know, typifies what we're talking about here. You could probably pick it out, but not the carrot. And men die earlier from heart disease, as I said. About 25% of all deaths related to heart disease occur between the ages of 35 and 65. And that's a statistic that really hits home for me, approaching 35. I mean, I don't think I'm at risk of a heart attack, but I know that my younger brother, 8 years younger than me, actually has high blood pressure. And you know, he's 25. So according to NHLBI, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute here at NIH, only 3% of Americans practice, 3% of Americans practice the big 4 habits that prevent heart disease. What do you think the big 4 are? Do we know?
Diet, exercise.
Diet and exercise.
Less alcohol consumption.
Healthy diet, regular exercise, maintain a healthy weight, and smoking. So knowing your numbers, and there's several numbers to know. They're all really important. The first is blood pressure, right? And we know normal is 120 over, less than 120 over 80, right? And then it's the pre-hypertension and then hypertension that you know, that you might find by going stopping by one of those little kiosks in the hallway. But you know, that's where you're going to find out if your blood pressure is a bit elevated, if you're going to the doctor just for preventive screenings, an annual physical, that kind of thing. Oh, sorry about that, guys. So cholesterol, LDL, obviously there's two types of main cholesterol, LDL and HDL. I just put LDL up here, and less than 100 is optimal. So, most people know 120/80, but I don't know if most people know, less than 100. So that's optimal for LDLs, and then between 70 and 100 is normal for fasting glucose as well. So remember 100 again, and then weight, BMI, and waist size, and this is one of the times that I can address your question. And I was actually at the American College of Sports Medicine meeting just 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about waist size and using waist size instead of BMI because your weight may not change as you lose body fat, right? But your waist size often will. And when I was actually working with nutrition clients, several of my clients said, I can tell that even though the number on the scale is not changing, I can tell I'm making progress because my clothes are fitting differently. And if we just focus on the BMI or just focus on the number, which is reflected on the scale, we're missing potentially something that can show improvement. And people will get discouraged if they're not seeing that number change, but it's really, if you go from the right to the middle, and you're gaining more upper body mass or something, you may not decrease in weight, but it's still a significant, important change. So how often should I visit the doctor? The recommendation is every 2 years up until the age of 50. Well, these animations really didn't work. All right, after age 50, annually. And then if you do have high blood pressure, get it checked every year just to track the progress in it. Another great question, what can I do to prevent skin cancer? We all know to apply sunblock. Sometimes we don't do what we know we should do, but then reapply regularly. This is something that's difficult for me because I love being outside. I love refereeing soccer games and being outside all day. But if you can avoid direct sunlight during those hours, if you're a cyclist or doing active things, gardening and things like that, if you can get out earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon, you will reduce the time that you're out when the rays are the strongest. And then getting sunburn. This is a great statistic that suffering 5 or more sunburns doubles your lifetime risk of developing melanoma. Let alone, it's obviously very uncomfortable to look like this guy, but it definitely does increase your risk of developing skin cancer. And then conducting an examination head to toe so that you can notice changes, particularly in in areas that are exposed to skin, or exposed to sun, and then getting a yearly skin checkup from the doctor. Yes, sir?
Yeah, a question about the sunburns. Is there, it says 5 or more, is there more or less a linear relationship between the number of sunburns and the probability of getting skin cancer?
That's a great question. I am not qualified to answer that yes or no. I would, the risk factors for any type of cancer is so difficult to pinpoint exactly, but I think this is probably an epidemiological study that asked people how many times they get sunburned and found sort of a tipping point at that point. I mean, obviously, you're not necessarily completely safe at 4. Just keep a check and yep, I've only gotten 4, so I'm good. I'm not going to develop skin cancer. Cancer is a funny disease. One of the leading people again, at the American College of Sports Medicine conference a couple weeks ago, one of the leading researchers in physical activity recently passed away this year from lung disease. and she had never smoked at all in her life. And so, you know, some people develop melanoma that have spend most of their time inside, so there's no guarantee. This was another question that came up a lot, you know, especially in the older population here at NIH. What can I do to avoid developing dementia? My parents have asked me this as well. Go to these talks that are being held at NIH on Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and tell me what I can do to stay, you know, stay engaged longer. So there is no surefire way, again, to prevent any disease, but it may be beneficial to do the following. So one is to keep your mind active. And there was a great talk very recently here at NIH on music and the brain, and how musicians, their brain is wired in very complex ways, different from people that do not play music. And so playing a musical instrument, I don't think that the experts in that field didn't think that necessarily listening to music had the same effect, but really engaging your brain, probably watching someone play chess wouldn't have the same effect as actually playing chess. But playing games or puzzles, you know, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, playing instruments, and then memory training. Being physically and socially active. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain. And here's a great slide that I found from the University of Illinois. And the red, you know, is obviously the higher activation area. And this was taking a test, and there was more blood flow to the parts of the brain that were, you know, obviously engaged here, but they were sitting quietly prior, and then they took a 20-minute walk prior to taking the test. So the proof is in the color there. Quit smoking. Obviously, there's a few themes that come up here. I could, you know, put them in buckets, but you know, because they're so cross-cutting, I didn't mind the repetition here. I don't think that, you know, it's a surprise that quitting smoking is good for you, but across all of these things, smoking has been also linked to dementia. And lowering your blood pressure, again, is also linked to avoiding dementia. Pursuing education. Now this is kind of one of those, again, correlative things, but it goes back to just keeping your mind active. And then maintaining a healthy diet. And you've probably heard the value of omega-3 fatty acids. And the reason for that is not always emphasized, and that is because that's what actually makes up your brain. That's the fatty tissue that makes up your brain. And saturated fats impair the deposition of the healthy fats in your brain. So you know, if you're not eating things that contain omega-3s and too many omega-6s, omega-6s are generally in red meats and saturated fat oils. Omega-3s are in fish and nuts and other things like that. Consider that if you're worried about developing dementia. So this was an interesting question, probably not one that would be included in a women's health talk, right? I don't know a lot of women that smoke cigars. But there is kind of a common perception out there, I think, at least in cigar smokers that I've talked to, that they're not as harmful as cigarettes. And although there is some crossover between those smokers, that reputation is probably based on the fact that they're not smoking cigars every day. You're not smoking a pack of cigars as you would maybe smoke a pack of cigarettes. And you're also not inhaling as much, but as we know, secondary smoke is obviously an issue. And they're actually worse than cigarettes. One reason is they contain more carcinogenic tars. They contain more nicotine, and it's absorbed through the mouth because you're holding the smoke in your mouth a bit more. And because the cigar wrappers are less porous, they don't burn completely, and more of the toxins are released. So, yes?
Okay, what's the logic of that? If the rappers burn less, there's more toxins? Wouldn't it be if they burn more?
Well, they don't burn as completely and just burn. I think it because they hold on to the toxins more, and then you inhale more rather than burning and just falling into ash. So it stays there in your mouth, ready to be sucked in longer. Does that make sense? That's what they found. Right. So can drinking permanently affect your memory? Yes, drinking can affect your memory, both short and long term. I remember back in college they gave a presentation during our orientation that said, this was over 10 years ago, that said, that they found there were sufficient studies then to find that drinking the weekend before would impair test performance and things after that, the week after it. And heavy or moderate drinking can cause slips in memory. And studies have shown that significant brain shrinkage in alcoholic men and women compared to control groups. And I actually have a picture of this, and that is significant. No, really. You can actually see here, these are equal age women or men, and you can see that the brain actually has shrunk. Dehydration is actually one can cause, just from physical activity they've found that can shrink the brain as well. But you're assuming that these people were at equal hydration status, and if that's not a picture that'll stick with you when you're at the bar next time, I don't know what will. So what changes in behavior are advised as you age? Eat a healthy diet. It seems to be a recurring theme, right? Exercise your body or continue or begin aerobic exercise. And here are the effects of exercise on aging, favorable effects. It can increase VO2 max, cardiac output, bone density. That's one thing that gets overlooked in men many times. We think of osteoporosis as something that afflicts women primarily, and that's true postmenopausally, but men are just as susceptible, if not eating a healthy diet and not getting the things that they need. And strength training is something that can definitely help bone density as well. Exercise your mind and control stress. And I put this slide up here because we think of stress as bad, right? And stress is all around us all the time. And it's really a response to the stress that we need to control, right? There's a lot of things throughout our day that we don't have control over. And myself being a control freak, that sometimes stresses me out. But we can control our response to things. And so, I think at the left side of the figure, if you were there all the time, you would probably be a very boring person, and you would be bored, and you wouldn't be engaged, and your performance would reflect that. So we want to be in the middle, because once we reach the other side, as it says, fatigue and exhaustion, and we burn out. But when we talk about controlling stress, it's really controlling our response to the stress and not trying to control the situation as much as we might, and just controlling what we can control and letting go of what we can't. Again, limiting alcohol consumption and not smoking, and focusing on prevention, communicating with your physician. There's some great videos actually on the AHRQ website about asking questions of your doctor, and then getting a flu vaccine annually. If our commander-in-chief can go and get a flu vaccine. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And then cancer screenings and cholesterol checks every 5 years. So this is one of my favorite slides, actually, and you'll find out why in a moment. But what changes in health are normal as you age, right? And I underline normal because the next line really says it, right? Most individuals are less active as they age. So what is normal? Is normal what society dictates is normal, or is normal what physiologically we could do, right? And because most individuals are less active as they age, they experience decreased bone mineral density and osteoporosis. Brittle bones and stable joints, less stable joints lead to weaker hips, shoulders, knees, maybe falling because of this, reduced eyesight, cataracts, macular degeneration, hearing loss, loss of bladder control, and GI issues may increase, right? But what if we didn't get less active? What if we were like this guy in the UK who just finished a triathlon at 91 years old? I was at a triathlon this past weekend, and there was a 65 to 69 category. And there were 3 people placing in it. And there was a 70 to 74 category. And there were placers in that as well.
Like, I was so impressed that it was tragic what happened in Boston, but one of the things that stuck with me is the guy who was like in his 72. And
That's
he was
right.
taller, and he was like at the front of the pack.
That's right.
I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, she was just mentioning the gentleman that was finishing just as the bombing in the Boston Marathon, who was 72 years old. And I saw an interview with him right afterwards, and they said, you know, so is this going to change your mindset towards racing? And he said, no, I'm going to keep doing it. And so I think this is a gentleman that's almost 60 years old. And I think it really is true that we don't stop exercising because we get old. We grow old because we stop exercising. So speaking of exercise and growing older, when do men begin losing levels of human growth hormone? And that was a question that came up again as we were polling people in the hallway. And just as very brief background, growth hormone is produced by the pituitary gland, that small pea-size organ within the brain, and it fuels childhood growth and then helps maintain tissues and organs throughout your life. And beginning around age 30, the pituitary gland slowly reduces the amount of growth hormone that it produces. And often the symptoms, because of the cascade, the pathways that are involved in these processes of maintenance of muscle mass and tissues and organs, the symptoms of low testosterone and low human growth hormone are often confused. And so people are considering supplements for both, and it's not clear whether those are effective across the board. I was looking into the studies in these, and there's no strong recommendation that men should take supplements or get injections of these. And this is something that is a natural progression as we age. Any questions on anything so far? Sure.
Yeah, about this testosterone. On testosterone, there are all these tables of it, even age-adjusted testosterone. And it may be that most males do not get tested for that, but if you get tested and if you're below some range, I think there's a medical consensus that you should have testosterone supplementation.
Right, sure.
Or maybe you were saying something different.
No, then just, I'm going to repeat the question because we're being videotaped. If you're out of the medical range, I mean, there's a limit where if you're out of the range, if your testosterone is too low, then you should receive injections or something like that, supplemental testosterone, and you're right about that. I'm saying that there is a pretty large normal range, and some of the symptoms of just that are not necessarily associated with that, or there's confusion and it's attributed to low testosterone when it may have something else to do with that. Maybe not eating breakfast, fatigue, and it's not that. But absolutely, if you are tested for it and you're found to be low, then that's in the doctor's.
But I would say there is debate about what that so-called age-adjusted range is.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you're saying that if many males aren't doing all they could to maintain reasonable health, they're in the pool that's used to calculate averages, then
Sure.
you basically have
A skewed,
down
that's right.
range of testosterone against which people are being measured.
Sure, that's a great point.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I don't want to say there's no controversy around there.
Sure.
But,
Thank you for your yeah. Did you have a question? Okay. All right, moving on to blood pressure. So another question that came up is, how can I lower my blood pressure without medications? Again, lifestyle plays an important role in treating high blood pressure. Some part of it is genetic. I know with cholesterol and blood pressure, I know many people that are very, very active, and they have high of both. And so there is definitely a genetic component. It varies by race and gender, but definitely things like stress, body weight, inactivity, the amount of salt you intake in your diet, alcohol use, and age all affect blood pressure. But if you are able to successfully control your blood pressure with a healthy lifestyle, you could avoid, delay, or reduce the need for medication. And I've seen that in some of the people that I've worked with right just here at NIH. So there's 10 lifestyle changes, and I'll just bring those up quickly. So lose extra pounds or watch your waistline. There's the body weight thing. Exercise regularly. Eat a healthy diet. Again, lots of recurring themes here, right? Reduce sodium in your diet. Limit the amount of alcohol you drink. Tobacco, again, cut back on caffeine. Reduce your stress. Monitoring your blood pressure at home, making regular doctor's appointments, especially if you have high blood pressure. And then getting support from friends and family can ease that emotional component to high blood pressure. Injuries, especially when you're working with athletes in the fitness side of things, as I do many times, people always ask, what is the best way to care for this nagging injury that I've had for the last 10 years, right? Especially ligament and cartilage issues. One of the first things is stop if it hurts, right? I know that's one of the hardest things for me to do, right? Especially when I work with runners and they're used to running every single day. To take time off, they feel like they're losing ground, and they'll get out of shape right away. And it's difficult to overcome a nagging injury when you just keep going, because it's probably that activity that caused the injury initially. So cross-training is a great thing here. So I say no pain, all gain. So initially, following, if it's an acute injury, you can seek medical care if it's severe enough, or if you're able to treat it at home. RICE, right, the acronym, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And people are using compression more and more, not just for injuries, but just to reduce inflammation and things like that. There's many products out on the market now. The compression sleeves for the calves and things that professionals are using, not just during races, but for recovery. And the evidence is showing that it's not just a placebo effect. And then rehabilitation is so important. I've known many people who have not done the rehabilitation that they should have done. And years later, although they don't have a pain anymore, stiffness is not necessarily as much of an issue. Their range of motion is just limited because immediately after the injury, they didn't do the proper rehabilitation. So when you go to the physical therapist after an injury and they give you exercises, do them. That's the takeaway. And then to reduce stiffness and due to scar tissue, stretch the muscles and then warm up after exercise, and that's a big one. Just to get the joints lubricated, get the blood flowing, get the muscles warmed up, a proper exercise routine. And warming up is not just stretching, but really getting your heart rate up, your core temperature up, to prevent further damage to those. So I've been at it for 40 minutes. I'm going to throw in a little cartoon here. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I love this. I found this. Someone posted this on Facebook. Exercised once, but found that I was allergic to it. My skin flushed and my heart raced. I got sweaty and short of breath. Breath, it says, but I think she meant breath. He or she. And it was very dangerous. So beware when you're exercising. You may experience those symptoms. If you do, continue. So how can we reduce joint inflammation due to exercise? It depends on the cause of inflammation, right? Due to an acute injury, again, just as the previous slide, seek medical attention or rest, ice, compression, and elevation at home. If it's caused by arthritis, right, which is a common thing that people are coming into the fitness centers here at NIH saying, someone just came in yesterday and said, I need to use the elliptical. I can't run anymore on the treadmill because of my arthritis. So generally, you're not going to be able to cure that underlying condition. But physical therapy, orthotics, splints to support the joints, massage, and then water therapy, doing exercises in a pool will often alleviate some of those symptoms and even prevent them. Some other recommendations on decreasing inflammation, recovery, and that, just getting enough sleep, that's when your body repairs, right? A lot of people think, if I want to get stronger, I want to get faster, I need to work out more, and it's really the incorporation, right, of the effects that you're doing, the stimulation that you're doing during your exercise when you're resting and recovering. So getting, 8 hours a night. I don't sleep 8 hours a night, but that's the recommendation, and just recovering. Move. I'm not close to having arthritis, but I get stiff if I sit for too long. So, avoid sitting in one position for too long. Avoid pain. If there's things, and as I was thinking about this one, there's things that you do routinely in your house, lifting or reaching and things like that are painful, consider rearranging, where the heavy plates are in your cabinet or something like that, so you're not putting stress on your shoulders or your elbows or something like that by putting too much weight in an awkward position. And then de-stressing. Not just joint inflammation in this, but there's many studies out there that have looked at stress and inflammation. That's probably, if you go and Google and do inflammation in any disease, and inflammation is right up there. The link is very, very strong with everything now. So de-stressing can definitely help that. Other recommendations, again, eating lots of fruits and vegetables. I recently, just this week, saw a study on should you or should you not take a multivitamin. And it was, that's been the recommendation forever, right? Take a multivitamin, especially if you're not getting what you need from food. And I don't think that's necessarily changing. If you're not getting what you need, you don't want to be deficient in anything. But eating fruits and vegetables, getting it in its natural, whole food form is definitely better than taking a supplement. Again, omega-3s, here's some more examples. Mentioned before the fish, also flax seeds, chia seeds are super high in omega-3. Some oils, pumpkin seeds, nuts, weight loss, and then medications. I don't like to advise people to take, ibuprofen if you have pain. But I was suffering personally several years back from some inflammation that I thought was right across my glute area. And I thought, this is just going to go away. I'll just wait it out. I won't take anything. And I actually went to an orthopedist, and he said, have you ever had any GI inflammation? And I said, as a matter of fact, I have. And this was one of the third or fourth doctor that I went to, and he said, I think that the inflammation from your gut may have actually spread into your SI joint, your sacroiliac joint, which is a fused joint in that area. And so it aligned exactly with where the pain was. It was straight diagonally across from the hip in. And I was attributing it to the piriformis muscle being tight, and so it was stretching like crazy, and it just wasn't improving. And I said, what can I do? He said, just take some ibuprofen. It's just some inflammation. And it worked. And any other person would have done that right away, right? But me resisting taking medication, and I didn't need to take it chronically. I just took it for a few days. It reduced the inflammation, and it went away. But just an anecdotal story that there is some use in taking anti-inflammatory drugs. I put up both here because aspirin, ibuprofen, and naproxen, which goes as Aleve, are NSAIDs, right? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Acetaminophen, Tylenol, and the brand name is not an anti-inflammatory drug. It works by a different mechanism, and it will reduce pain, but it doesn't treat inflammation. So if it was in my case and I took Tylenol, it wouldn't have done anything. It would have made the pain go away, but it wouldn't have kind of cured, it wouldn't have treated the inflammation. So know what you're taking there. All right, nutrition. Again, I could talk about this all day. This is kind of what my PhD was in, nutritional physiology, but I broke it down into three parts here, all in one slide. Eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Eat a moderate amount of healthy fats, lean protein, legumes, and dairy is on. It's always on what they, the government puts out. But there's a lot of people that dairy doesn't work for, and whether you're lactose intolerant or otherwise, that's why it's in italics. If it doesn't work for you, there are other sources of calcium. So know that it's off to the side there. I think in a glass because that's the way they want to represent it. But focus on the others, and unless you're really lacking in vitamin D or calcium, you are able to get it from other sources. And then reduce starchy foods, sugary foods, refined foods, processed meats, fried foods, and red meat. And some people might disagree with me on the last one, but there are a lot of studies that have linked high red meat consumption with things that are not good, like heart disease and cancers and things like that. And something that I thought was interesting when I did a fact sheet on it with the National Cancer Institute when I was working with them 5 years ago, about the natural carcinogenic compounds that are formed, heterocyclic amines and others that are formed in charred red meat. And it's not formed in charred zucchini. So if you're grilling, be careful. And some people like it really well done, but there is a health risk in and I mention this because we're going into summertime, people will probably grill more. And so if there is something really charred, don't think, I don't want to waste this good food. It's delicious. It's probably not worth the risk when it's charred on the outside. You can scrape it away, but there are compounds in it that are naturally occurring when it's cooked at high temperature. So in summary, move your body, eat healthy foods, get regular checkups, and limit smoking and drinking. I think those were the recurring themes, right? And there's a tremendous number of resources on government websites. Healthfinder.gov is a great one. This was the men's health page there. NIH has a great men's health page. Medline Plus, which is a service of the National Library of Medicine and NIH, other great information there. And my final thoughts are, I really like this quote that I may not be there yet, but I'm closer than I was yesterday, right? And so if any of the behaviors here are things that you're not doing right now, don't despair. It's just get one step closer today than you were yesterday. So strive for progress, not for perfection. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you may have been holding on to. Yes, sir.
What would be an example of refined grains?
So, I mean, the stereotypical example is just white rice, right? So brown rice is unrefined, white rice is refined. A lot of people suggest eating oatmeal for breakfast, right? And for convenience, you can grab the little packs of instant oatmeal, right? But that's refined more than the quick oats, or the quick oats, and the quick oats is more than the whole rolled oats. And I found that I eat oatmeal in the morning, and I found that if you boil water and you pour it over the rolled oats, pretty much is exactly the same as boiling it, it takes no time, and so it really does make a difference. The added fiber has shown in studies where they've looked at people's glycemic response, their blood sugar spike after eating white rice versus brown rice, and it's significantly less. Other examples are things that I threw up there, like really anything that is processed, any grain that is processed. Yep.
I just wanted to share that I did adopt one major element of Mitt Romney's program, which was peanut butter sandwich for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you caught that. He does peanut butter and honey.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I use non-wheat, no gluten type of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it costs a little more, but organic peanut butter. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it. At least 5 days a week.
There you go. Finding what works for you is important. Yeah. No, and my mother eats the same thing every morning for breakfast. I think simplicity is really important, especially first thing in the morning when you're rushing out the door. And eating breakfast versus not eating breakfast is really it's important to eat something for a variety of reasons, to get your metabolism going so that you're not hungry later on. There's a variety of reasons to do it, and I think whatever you can do to simplify that process when you're half awake and still half asleep in the morning is important. So for years and years and years, and I say, Mom, don't you get bored with what you're eating? But she has some kind of fresh fruit with cottage cheese, and then oatmeal with a banana, and then a piece of toast with almond butter. And it's a big breakfast for a petite lady, but keeps her satiated all morning, and that's what she's found works for her, just the balance. Any other questions? Yes.
You said the slides would be available?
Yes. They'll be posted with the video when it's posted and archived next week. I can also, if you give me your email, I'd be happy to email it to you. Well, great. If there's nothing else, thank you very much for coming.